So this Zoran Mamdani thing is really getting people in a tizzy, just to put it mildly, in this scenario. So I think it's important to understand how this happens because, like I mentioned in my monologue, the reason why Zoran Mamdani is ascending to be as powerful as he is, and he will be the mayor of New York City, by the way. There is nothing that is stopping that train from getting into that station now. He is going to ascend to be where he is going to be the most powerful local politician in the world, like I said, or in the country, at least, like I said. And so this is all, like I mentioned, a remnant and an outgrowth of the class war that has been brewing in America for a very, very long time. And this should be incredibly concerning to anyone who really cares about this stuff, because this is the issue undergirding every single thing that is happening in our country right now. So what I've said for a long time, what I discovered by reading several influential people, Tucker Carlson's book, A Ship of Fools, helped me with this a lot. There were Victor Davis Hanson's book, Batya Ungar Sargon. Lots of smart people are talking about this now. Is that every problem, quote unquote, that we have in this country is some kind of problem that's actually a class problem. It's just disguised as something else. A race problem, more likely than not, is a class problem. A gender problem is more than likely a class problem. And again, I'm not a Marxist, I'm not a leftist, but there needs to be a discussion on the value-oriented conservative side about class, because as we've seen with Zoran Mamdani, and as we saw a little bit in terms of a lighter version, maybe in some ways, in Donald Trump, when you ignore class, you get people that are going to be elevated to do something about the class issue in the country. Charlie Kirk and Tucker Carlson were talking about this a couple weeks ago. We'll talk about that later on when it comes to young Americans, specifically millennials and Gen Z, and why they are so radical about this issue, because they probably should be at the end of the day. That's the kind of tough truth about this. But so, okay, this class war, how is it starting? And I think it's important to, before we go into how a class war happens, we need to understand that Mamdani is just the beginning of this dam breaking. There will be many more people than that come after Zoran Mamdani. There will be other copycats, and by the way, copycats that are not as smart and just as vicious as he is. When you get dumb people that are violent, that is a recipe for disaster in that way. At least Mamdani has some tact about the revolution he's currently spinning up right now. And like I said earlier, we have neglected this problem, the class problem, for far too long. We need to address it. And if we don't address it, it's going to open the door for people who are worse than Zoran Mamdani, much worse than Zoran Mamdani, to gain more and more of a foothold, political power. We're seeing this on the right with the issue of Nick Fuentes and the race issue and the anti-Semitism issue. And I think I might do an episode about that later on, because the same thing is happening on the right when it comes to the anti-woke backlash, just descending into stupidity and wild people like him and everything like that. But that's beside the point. So when you just shove a problem under the rug and you say that this is not actually happening, you don't need to worry about this, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, whatever you say to that person, you will get clapped for it. And that's what we're seeing right now. Mamdani is only in power because there has been such a neglect on the class issue that people are elevating someone like Mamdani, who is so radical in the area of class, that he is going to completely shutter an entire American city. And that is going to be the price that we have to pay, and New Yorkers unfortunately have to pay, for the ignorance of class by our ruling class. And so what this has led to is a door opening and an opportunity for people like Zoran Mamdani to have a place in American politics to serve, as mentioned, an increasingly radical group of people, namely economically disadvantaged young people. And by the way, I think it was hilarious about the data about Mamdani and people who voted for him. He didn't get a lot of people that were black, Mexican. He got some of those people, but it was primarily upper crust white people, or millennial white people, millennial young people, to put it broadly, or millennial white people that voted for Mamdani, which is so telling about this whole thing, because middle class, working class, blacks, Hispanics, Asians, etc., they don't want this. And there's a telling reason why they don't want this, because Mamdani is going to destroy the city. And so the issue of young people also is also interesting, and we're going to talk about this a lot today, is that revolutions are led overwhelmingly by young people, particularly by young men. So we need to see what's the recipe for this. We need to see what's going on here. And so this radicalization of young people is dangerous, that Mamdani is leading, among other people. Trump is kind of leading it on the right as well, because we cannot be unradical about talking about economics. We need to be radical in talking about economics because economics is the biggest lever for cultural stability, for overall individual stability, for family stability, everything around that. If you ignore the class issue, you will get revolution. That is how all revolutions start. It's not about race. It's not about gender. It's not about anything. That stuff is all background noise. If you ignore the class issue will come back and bite you so bad that your head will spin. And we need to start talking about it and how Mamdani is able to kind of capture this ethos. And so this is really, class wars starting with three things primarily. The first thing is you ignore the most important thing to a group of people, especially when they cry out for help. So the most important issue to a group of people, largely when we're talking politically, is class. I don't make enough money. I have too much debt. I'm not, my wage isn't growing. I can't afford to buy a home. I can't afford to send my kids to a good school. Our emergency fund is getting dwindled. 60% of Americans can't afford a $500 emergency right now out of pocket. And so we have heard these cries for help, particularly after the 2008 financial crisis, by millennials and by Gen Z now as they're ascending and starting to make money and getting out on their own, at least some of them. And they have gotten no help from this. They've gotten no help from this. And so our older generations, our boomers, the Gen X people, and some of the older folks, if they're still alive and still around to engage in this type of a problem, they have ignored the problems of young people getting launched economically for a long time. They've said the whole thing's like, well, just do what I did. Just pull yourself up by your bootstraps. They called them lazy. They called them snowflakes, etc. But the interesting thing about this is that they really did nothing to atone for or face the problems that really made their chances go down the tubes, particularly after two things: the 2008 financial crisis, which we've discussed, and COVID, which was the largest transfer of wealth that we have ever seen on a global economic scale. We'll talk about that later on as well. And we'll talk about the Scott Galloway TED Talk, but I want to touch on this briefly right now just to make sure we address it. So what is supposed to happen with wealth is it's supposed to transfer from old people to young people. And in COVID, that inverted. So wealth got transferred primarily from the earnings of young people to the assets of old people. That is how the COVID narrative flipped it for Gen Z, and 2008 more affected millennials. But regardless of what that is, we have seen no action. We have seen no alleviation. We've seen no one even talking about this or paying attention to this. So the 2008 financial crisis, COVID screwed the younger generation, which made them angry, understandably, upset, understandably. And instead of dealing with that issue of anger and resentment and all the things that were bubbling up underneath the surface, the older generations just kind of said, hey, figure it out. You're a grown up, be a big boy, whatever, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, all that stupid nonsense. So the second step on how to start a class war, you find a person who is brave enough to call them out on their BS and you elevate them. So all revolutions are known for a leader. All revolutions need a leader. So whether that is Fidel Castro in Cuba, whether it's Pol Pot in Cambodia, whether it is Mao Zedong in China back in the Great Leap Forward days of the mid-20th century, you need someone that is brave enough to go out from that group of people that is being oppressed, quote unquote, by the economics, and we'll talk about economics in this case, but by whatever the issue is. And they are the only ones that are bold enough to say, hey, you're wrong, we're getting screwed by this, and it's your fault. And that's hard to find, especially now, because so many people are so terrified to talk about anything and to, rock the boat in any form or fashion that really all you need is that one person kind of saying something convincing, and that'll probably be enough, to be honest. Like, it'll probably be enough to push it out to the broader masses and really have a dent be made in the conversation, the cultural conversation. So all revolutions need the face of the franchise. There's a reason why Che Guevara t-shirts sell so much, even today. And it's because he was so memorable in terms of the revolution that he led. And there's a reason why there's still statues of Lenin and all these other things around the world. And so communists, Marxists especially, and fascists on the right, let's be fair, with Hitler or Mussolini or Hirohito or any of these other guys that kind of rose up in the 20th century, that's where all this kind of broke out for the first time, they need to be brave enough to speak out against the established narrative. So when it comes to class in America, they need someone like Zoran Mamdani to say, hey, we can't afford anything, and that is your problem, and I'm going to come and smash you. Donald Trump, when he came into politics about 10 years ago, he needs to come out and he needs to say, or someone, but it was just Trump in this scenario, needed to say, hey, you're ignoring all of these middle-class factory workers in Ohio and Michigan and Indiana and everywhere else kind of around in that Rust Belt, Pennsylvania. And they're really angry at you because you took away their jobs and you outsourced their labor and you left them to be addicted to fentanyl and pills and not making enough money and living off the government and their housing being foreclosed on and their marriages falling apart and their kids falling into addiction. And that's really sinful, and you should hate yourself for that because we hate you for that. That's why Donald Trump got elected. That's exactly why I got elected. Same why he got reelected. Hey, this is so bad. People are so uninspired and torn down by every single thing that you have about yourself that we are going to crush you for it. We're going to crush you for it. And so the characteristics of this person, what does that look like? So they must be charismatic. They must have a swagger to them in terms of, hey, I'm going to talk about this way, and I'm going to have this. Luckily for Zoran Mamdani, he is a pretty handsome guy, and so he has that going for him too. Like, his face is everywhere. He's getting interviewed by Elizabeth Warren. He's doing all this kind of stuff. They also must say the quiet part out loud, and they must be brave enough to inspire people behind them, their supporters, their fellow revolutionaries that are following them into the fray, to throw them into power, and damn be the consequences. They're like, you know what? I don't like the way that Donald Trump acts on X, but I don't care. I don't like the fact that he's had third marriages and he's probably cheated on every single one of his wives multiple times. I don't care that he is kind of like a bully and he puts people down, etc. I'm mad, and I'm going to send Donald Trump into D.C. to F some people up, basically. You know, I don't like the fact that Mamdani is talking about blatantly violating the Fourth Amendment to seize public property and utilities and grocery stores. And I don't like that he's going to drive all the banks and all the financial institutions that power our economy out of here. And, you know, I'm white, and I don't like that I'm going to get taxed more because Zoran Mamdani says I should get taxed more because I'm, you know, inherently racist or something. But you know what? I'm really mad that I'm $60,000 in student loans and I can't declare bankruptcy on these things, and I can't afford to go out to dinner. I can't afford a home. I can't afford to get married. I can't afford to have children. So I'm going to send Zoran Mamdani in there to you know, basically break these guys' teeth in. And that's exactly how this works. You know, Jesse Kelly has this great saying about communism, where he says, communism is a religion of the malcontent. And I love that, because that's true. It is a religion and a political philosophy that is built on resentment, that is built on just the coercing and the bludgeoning of people in power so that you can have a way to feel better about yourself, essentially. So, leads to number 3. The third reason how to start a class war, the third way to start a class war. You exact terrifying punishment on those who maligned you once you're in power. So once you're in power, you go about revenge. You exact revenge on the people that you declared your candidacy against. So Mamdani has already made this very clear. He's going to drive out the billionaires. He said, I'm going to tax you out the gills. You are going to hate living here. And basically all the other people, like white people, etc., I'm going to punish you. I'm going to tax you more because you're white. I will do that. I am going to raise your tax rate by 100% to drive you out of the city or to make you pay to fund all of my social projects or whatever it's going to be. I am going to freeze rent. I am going to take your property. I am going to do that. And because for the revolutionary, for the communist, for the Marxist, once you achieve power, once you become the mayor of New York City or the president of the Soviet Union or whatever the position is going to be, it is not enough for your followers to make ends meet. You have to crush everybody that opposed you in brutal fashion to make sure that they never hurt you again. This is why, by the way, that people are starting to get really mad at Donald Trump for not doing anything about the Epstein list. It's exactly the same thing. Hey, I hate these people. Why is no one in prison? Why is the list not released? Hey, the Department of Justice was weaponized against the Biden administration or in the Biden administration. Why are none of those people in jail? Why are people not being put in cuffs and perp walked? Why is none of this stuff happening? And this is what makes these extreme movements on the right, but particularly on the left, so awful. The communists, the Marxists, etc. It always ends more than likely in bloodshed, and a lot of it. And you've seen this across, like communism has killed hundreds of millions of people over the years. And fascism has killed many, many people as well. But it is the fuel of all of these things. And at least with fascism, and this is not an excuse for fascism at all, but with fascism, it's built on a perverse sense of pride, and pride is the sin that leads to all the other sins. That's a biblical concept, at least to me it is. But the anger underneath the communist, underneath the Marxist, underneath the leftist is so palpable, and it's so forward that once you unleash it, you can't put the genie back in the bottle. And that's exactly why this is happening with Zoran Mamdani. This is why it's happening with Donald Trump. This is why it's happening in other extremist movements. But in terms of class, and if you want to start a war on class, which is about the most destructive thing you can do to any single culture you can do, that's how I would do it. And that's how Zoran Mamdani's doing it. And to his credit, he's doing it very well, I think.